I have tried hundreds of knitting tips and tricks over the past couple of years. And among them were a couple that were so utterly unhinged, I normally wouldn't even dare to show them to you. But today, this is going to change. I picked some of the craziest knitting techniques online, techniques with hundreds of thousands of views, and we are going to knit them together to see whether they actually work or not. They typically don't. There are tons of videos floating around TikTok and Instagram with hundreds of thousands of views and likes that promise a super easy way to join in a new yarn. And let's be honest, anything that interrupts our knitting flow is annoying, and running out of yarn is probably at the very top of that list. But let's take a look whether this knot actually works. So, on paper, this method couldn't be easier. So you start with a cross, then you create this little twist here, and then you cross again. So you create two little double twists here, and then you pull tight. Easy as that. And then you trim away the excess. So that's the plan. Now I'm not going to waste any breath on the fact that you have absolutely no control over the position of this knot in your fabric. Instead, I would like to highlight that if this knot comes undone, you are left with two little stubs here, and not even if you are a magician with a tapestry needle will you be able to fix that in an easy way. And just to be very clear here, this knot will come undone. For this very reason, I typically pick a sharp tapestry needle, weave in my tails here diagonally, so I just pierce through the fabric like so, pull the yarn through, and this will be so much more secure. And if you want to go the extra mile, you could go in a different direction as well. Just go diagonal, and it will be, big promise here, utterly invisible on the right side. If you really don't want to weave in your yarn the traditional way, then please split your yarn like so, and do the exact same here over on the other side as well. Then you thread the yarn on a tapestry needle and cross these two ends like so. And then you use your tapestry needle and pierce right through the yarn and pull that end you thinned out a little bit here all the way through. And then you do the exact same over here on the other side as well. Pull on the tails to straighten things out and trim away these little stubs. And here is your perfectly secure join that won't add any unsightly lumps to your fabric. Now please, I am not your mother and I'm not the knitting police either. If you like knots and you've had great experiences with them in the past, go ahead. I mean, the fuzzier your yarn is and the easier it felt, the more secure that join will be. Personally, I never use them. I don't trust them, and I actually don't believe the alternative ways to join in a new yarn are all that much more difficult. There has always been this silly divide between crochet and knitting, and this girl definitely shows how to turn the quarrel into an asset and simply by itself using a crochet hook. Let's take a look. I'll insert my crochet hook here into my stitch, crochet or knit one stitch into the next stitch, pull through, and then I can bind off that stitch. grab the yarn, bind off that stitch, grab the yarn and bind off that stitch. One last time, grab the yarn. You can pull through right away as well. So it works like a charm. What's really interesting here is that you don't actually need to knit one stitch. You can also just chain these stitches here into a bind off edge. Now this edge will be quite a lot tighter, but you can definitely do this, and this is especially interesting because nothing whatsoever prevents you from doing this here from the other side of your knitting needle. So you can also slip that stitch and then chain here from the other side. Of course, this leads to the next question: can you also use a crochet hook to cast on stitches? Well, of course you can. Start with a slip knot and then simply chain stitches here around your knitting needle like so. And this will create a very beautiful chain stitch edge here. Of course, you probably already know that you can simply fix a dropped stitch using a crochet hook here. No need to unravel, and that is precisely why I always have a crochet hook in my knitting bag. And if you need to pick up stitches from an edge, you can also do this using a crochet hook. And in fact, this is my preferred way to do it, because often just using your knitting needle is a little bit awkward and it doesn't work, especially if your gauge is a little bit more on the tighter side. Also, a very smart trick. If you are interested, I have a full video on essential crochet for knitters. I'll link it to you up in here. It would be a shame if you waste all that potential and skip this lesson. Most knitters I know hate seaming, but sewing in a zipper, that is probably at the very top of the list of things most knitters absolutely want to avoid at all costs. So here we have someone who approaches this issue in a very unique and, dare I say, very neat way. But let's take a look if this actually works. So I have a little swatch here with a little pocket here on the inside. I have my zipper and I have a tapestry needle. So let's try this out. Okay, so this is how things are supposed to work. So you do the Kitchener stitch. So you drop one stitch knitwise and then you go into the next stitch purlwise without dropping it. And now you need to stay below the knitting needle and pierce here through to the other side. To the other side, pull the yarn all the way through, making sure this stays below. Here you need to stay below as well. And then you can perform the other half of the Kitchener stitch here. So drop one purlwise and go into the adjacent stitch knitwise. Pull all the way through. Now you need to go into the zipper again and pierce right through, making sure that you stay in a nice line, and this is important that you maintain your gauge. So then pull through, making sure the yarn stays below, here below again. So let's do this one more time. So drop knitwise, go into the next stitch purlwise, and then go into the zipper, pull all the way through, stay below, drop purlwise, knitwise, pull all the way through, and then here, go through your zipper like so. So this is possibly the most difficult part here. You don't want to mess up your gauge, and I would say this will require quite a bit of experience to get this right. So quite a couple of minutes later, this here would be the result. So I think this is an awesome technique. Now, if I was working on a real cardigan, I possibly would have used some chalk here to mark the line where I need to go through. But other than that, you know, this is just awesome. Now I will say that this is a lot of extra work, and you might not be able to use it for every project, especially if you're using a bulkier yarn. And on top of that, if you actually need to change the zipper, then you are going to be in deep trouble. But it is definitely a technique I would keep in the back of my mind. Now here's someone who claims to have found a super easy and neat way to create a fold line when knitting a double color in a 1x1 rib stitch. Now in the video there is no tutorial or so, but on the screen it just says to slip all purl stitches for 3 rows. So let's try that out. So here's what we should do when we come to the purl stitches. We just slip them, and we should do this for 3 rows. So I just tried this, and it creates this weird little thing on the back side, but if I want to fold things, it actually doesn't work. It acts as more as a buffer or a barrier. It works beautiful in this direction, it works beautiful in this direction, but that's actually not what I want. To make this work, you need to slip those purl stitches purlwise with yarn held in front. Bring the yarn to the front, slip purlwise, bring the yarn to the back. See, that is what we're talking about. All it took was this one further detail, slip with yarn held in the front. Another super easy way to add a fold line is simply purling across one row. This will create a different sort of fold line. See, with these little spikes here. This one here is a little bit less noticeable. However, this purl row will work for any pattern, stockinette stitch, 2x2 ribbing, and so on. So you can use this for every pattern. This here looks best when done for 1x1 ribbing. My possibly most favorite fold line goes like this. So you knit 2 together, yarn over, knit 2 together, yarn over, across the whole row, and then you simply continue in stockinette stitch. And if you fold things over, you create these beautiful little, well, picots, or this little sawtooth edge. So this can be a great choice for any folded hem or cuff where you want this extra little something. So to sum it up, fold lines are great, and there are so many use cases. But please, this is a call that goes out to all the content creators and designers out there. It's 2026. Don't use a slip one or make one assuming, yeah, they're gonna know how to do that anyway. Be specific and save your viewers, your readers, those who purchase the pattern so much frustration. So here we have one of these videos that lead to instant gratification, where you can see someone applying the finishing touches to a pillow knitted in garter stitch. Now, isn't this wonderful? Or is it? The most important knowledge I can impart here is that there is a special mattress stitch for garter stitch. So I have a little swatch here, and if you take a very close look at these edges, there is a line of bumps here on either side, and it's always here such a bump, and then there is another bump here, sometimes a little bit here slanting towards the side, and it's the same here on this side. This is a bump and here is a bump. So I am going to go through the bottom part of that bump here on this side and through the top part over on this side. Bottom here, top here. So it's actually easy. Sometimes you need to pull things apart a little bit to see it. But other than that, just weave back and forth. And then you can watch the true satisfaction as I pull on this seam here. Because as you can see, it is almost invisible. So, and it doesn't even form a big ridge here on the wrong side. So I want you to know that there's also a mattress stitch for garter stitch. And as you can see, look how well this works. I also want you to know that you can pick up here these bumps using a relatively small knitting needle, like so. And then you simply knit across, continuing in garter stitch. And if you do it like this, you won't need to touch a tapestry needle at all and still create a very nice and seamless transition. So I do feel seaming garter stitch can be magical, but if you know a couple of smart tricks, it will be even more magical. Quick intermission. In-depth tutorials full of tips and tricks like this one here wouldn't be possible without the support of my loyal patrons. So if you want to ensure that I'm in a position to record more videos like this one here, then please subscribe to my Patreon account today and get access to further tips and see what's going on behind the scenes. This next technique seems ingenious and totally dumb at the same time. So as you can see, she is using a crochet hook to knit in the buttons straight away. Let's take a look whether that works or not. Okay, first step, you work across until you come to the spot where you want to place your button. And then you need to secure these stitches here, bring the yarn to the front, and pick up your button and your crochet hook. And then just go through one hole, grab the yarn and pull through a loop as such. And then simply, it can be a little bit more on the fiddly side. Simply pull that loop here through the other side, leaving you with such a loop here on your knitting needle. And now you bring the working yarn here to the back, important, and slip that loop here back to the left needle. Make sure that you don't accidentally twist it. And now you have this extra loop here on your knitting needle and the original next stitch, and you simply knit them together. Before you drop that, try to tighten up quite a bit to get all this extra slack here out of that stitch, and then continue knitting. And then a couple of rows later, this here would be the result. This here is the view from the wrong side. So the button is definitely firmly attached to my fabric. Now here's the thing, there is a reason why they teach any new recruit in the military how to reattach a button, because they come undone. So I feel this is a bad idea for multiple reasons. So the smallest issue is, of course, the holes of the button need to be big enough so you can actually fit a crochet hook and your yarn through. But setting that aside, what happens if the yarn breaks and the button comes undone? Then you really are in serious trouble, because you need to mend your knitting at the same time, otherwise everything will unravel. So I don't know. I will say there are quite a couple of buttons that are decorative only. Think of the buttons one would add to the cuff of a blazer or a suit, or maybe you knitted a pillow. That button is going to be used once or twice a year, or the button of the sweater of a teddy bear or something like that. And in these cases, I actually think it's a smart idea, because usually when you want to attach buttons to knitwear, you need to insert a little disc of fabric felt on the back side or another button, so it actually stays put and becomes viable. And with this technique, you don't need to do it, and it's secure in and by itself. So I understand the allure of this technique, and I think there are actually a lot of smart use cases. I just wouldn't use it for a cardigan. Now, who isn't looking for a beautiful hem, a beautiful cuff that doesn't roll in, is full of stockinette stitch, and is also easy to knit? Well, this lady here seems to have a very ingenious approach. So she's starting with a longtail cast on, but uses 2 different skeins in 2 different colors. And then a couple of rows later, she picks up the purl bumps from the wrong side and knits them together with the current row. And then later on, she simply unravels the rest of the longtail cast on. But does this actually work? Let's take a look. So let's give this a try. I will start with a simple slip knot here, and then I will pick up my yarn as I would for a standard longtail cast on and start casting on stitches. So I'm just going to work across this bit here. Remember to purl across the first row in here. When you come to that odd little slip knot, you can just drop that and continue working across. Now let's see whether this works or not. So I'm gonna pick up my first little purl bump here and just knit it together with the next stitch, and then I'll go hunting here for the next little purl stitch and repeat, fiddle that through and work all the way across. So here, this is the next little purl stitch, all the way across like so. But let's see if I can actually get this here to unravel. So it actually works remarkably well, and also looks good. So it's a valid technique. My possibly biggest issue with it is that you can do it a lot easier and a lot more convenient. So you start with a slip knot, but you do it around 2 knitting needles at the same time, and one at least needs to be a circular, could also be 2 of them. And then you simply wrap the yarn around your knitting needle, and each wrap is 1 stitch. So if you want to have 10 stitches, you wrap it around 10 times. And then you simply turn the work around, pick the circular knitting needle, pull it out so only the cable is attached, and then you simply knit across. Simply knit across those 10 stitches. You don't need to knit the slip knot, you can unravel that, and then you simply continue working according to your pattern. And then when it's time to join the two layers, you simply slide these stitches back to the knitting needle, and then you can work them together a bit like you would work a 3-needle bind off or so. So I feel this is a lot easier. You don't need to pick up any stitches. You don't need that second bit of scrap yarn, and the result will be exactly the same. It's just going to be easier. So as you can see, the result will be the exact same. It's just so much easier to get there, if you ask me. Now the next technique I want to show you is closely related, and here we have someone who uses the same principle to knit a tubular cast on to create a very, almost invisible edge for 1x1 ribbing. So she starts with a provisional cast on around a barber cord. She uses the Italian cast on and not the Turkish cast on, and later on she picks up those stitches from the barber cord to join those two layers. Neat, isn't it? Or is there an easier way to achieve this? You start the way you would do a longtail cast on, but instead of a longtail cast on, you start with a simple twisted loop. Simple twisted loop. And then you go back and forth between these strings and pick up the other string. So let me show you. So you go around the top string and pick the bottom string from above. You go around the bottom string and pick up the top string from above. Bottom string, top string, bottom string, top string, bottom string, top string, bottom string. And once you have enough stitches, ending here with a string here where you went around the top string, you simply turn your work around. Make sure that you turn around in the right direction, otherwise that last stitch here will unravel. And then you work across this row using the double knitting technique. So I'm going to knit that first stitch here through the back loop, and then I bring my yarn to the front and slip the next stitch purlwise. Knit one through the back loop, and slip one with yarn held in front, one through the back loop, slip one with yarn held in front, and so on. And then here in the next row, you knit all these stitches that you just slipped, and you slip all the stitches that you've knitted. So just like so. So it goes really, really quick, but this is essentially double knitting. Then you can turn around, and now you can decide whether you knit one more pass. So you could knit one, slip one purlwise, or you simply switch to your 1x1 ribbing pattern. So there is no right or wrong here. It will create a slightly different edge if you work across 2 more rows in double knitting. And then a couple of rows later, this will be the result. So a very, very nice edge that seemingly just rolls over. If you notice that your edge is flaring out a little bit and is more on the looser side, then go down a knitting needle size. So maybe you are working your project with 4mm knitting needles, then go down to 3mm and so on. You can toy around a little bit, but typically I find that working the tubular cast on with at least 1 full needle size smaller creates better results. Here we have someone trying to squeeze their overly large needles into stitches that seem a little bit too tight. But lo and behold, the madness has a meaning because it's meant to help you unravel in a controlled way without losing any stitches. I feel this is an excellent technique with a lot of use cases. Nothing prevents you from using a knitting needle that is a couple of sizes smaller. And then always pick up the right leg of all of these stitches. Always the right leg. And you will notice that this smaller knitting needle is so much easier. And the other thing I want to show you here, we have a couple of purl stitches, and you can easily pick up these purl stitches as well. So if you pull this apart here, can you see this here is the right leg of that purl stitch, and I can pick that up here all the same. Now you could unravel this, but you can also use this to knit across. So you can simply join in a new yarn here and simply, it's gonna be a little bit more on the tricky side, but you can use these stitches to knit across. And then you can create a second layer that is firmly attached to your fabric, and it creates a very, very nice transition. I mean, apart from these 4 purl stitches here, of course. So let's suppose you want to add pockets to a cardigan or a hoodie, then this can be a very lovely and seamless way to achieve this. But of course, you can also use this technique to unravel to a designated spot without your knitting unraveling any further, and then you can just pick up your work and continue knitting. And as I've said, the fact that this knitting needle is a lot smaller doesn't matter, because it just acts as a stitch holder. Just remember to replace it with the proper size after that row. And now it is over to you. Do you have any really weird knitting techniques that work surprisingly well? Well, then share it with the world and comment below. If you take a quick look at the description, you will also find a list with links to the full videos I briefly shared in this video. And just to reinforce this, I am not the knitting police. I'm just adding my comments here. But please see it in this way. So it's a buffet, and all these content creators added some items, and I added some more. And then you come to the buffet and you pick whatever you enjoy and leave what you don't. Really, again, your hobby, your rules. Anyway, happy knitting and enjoy the rest of your day.